If you're enjoying this program, consider leaving us a tip at ko-fi.com/World Cinema History. Or, for more content, join our DVD Extras Club. Again, that's ko-fi.com/World Cinema History. Or follow the link in the episode description. This episode contains conversations about suicide, sexual assault, and the horrors of German concentration camps during the Second World War. Listener discretion is advised. I would like to take this opportunity to apologize to you, Erin. You've never brought this up, but I interrupted you last week for yet another of my long-running Silahate Vivaldi jokes. I went to go edit it out of the podcast, but it actually fit too perfectly into the discussion we were having about what it's like to be a woman in a male-dominated society, or whatever we were talking about. I don't know. I was going through my one-liners in my notes, and I wasn't paying attention. Deleting it felt like destroying the evidence. I figured the cover-up was worse than the crime, so I left it in. This is where I told you to come up with some zingers. Go ahead, be brutal, but make sure it's funny.
I didn't actually come up with anything because, I don't want to be mean. Thank you for the apology. I'm not good at being mean to people.
I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed.
It's all part of growing up in the patriarchy. It's hard to be mean to people because you never know what's going to happen if you do.
Why you stay friends with me, I have no idea. You just have very, very bad taste. I blame you. Anyway.
Yeah, I think that's probably it.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, kids, if you want to know what misogyny is, just listen to me interrupt Erin, mansplain Vivaldi to her, and then cut her off to turn to another male colleague, all in one glorious minute of audio forever etched into the internet. Whatever else, I can serve as a bad example. Don't worry, I've already canceled myself. I no longer follow me on social media. I formed a woke mob. I will no longer be listening to this podcast, except to edit it and to pump up the numbers on episodes that aren't doing well. But other than that, no, I'm boycotting me. You can hear both episodes on ko-fi.com/World Cinema History. If you like what you hear, consider leaving a few bucks in the jar. If you don't like what you hear, help us upgrade our sound equipment, and maybe you will. And help keep us ad-free. I don't want to hawk online therapy or mail-order mattresses, but I will, if that's what it takes, to get some good sound up in here. That's my cold open. I'm Eric Trommater.
I'm Erin Brown.
And this is World Cinema History. To those who say I'm above politics, oh yeah. To those who think Donald Trump is Santa Claus, only older, oh yeah. To those who type Buy American in the comment section from their Chinese-built cell phones, oh yeah. To those who use the word pretentious, but they don't know what it means, oh yeah. To those who refuse to look up what pretentious means because looking up pretentious is pretentious, even though that's not what pretentious means, and they'd know that if they just look it up, oh yeah. This week, the answer to the pub trivia question: who was the first woman to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Director? The director was Lina Wermüller, and the film she was nominated for was 1975's Seven Beauties, which we'll be covering this week, starring Giancarlo Giannini as Pasqualino. Seven Beauties. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it in Italian. Do you blame me? Jean Gilman, you have scarred this podcast forever. He's nicknamed Seven Beauties because of his 7 unmarriageable sisters. Pasqualino accidentally kills a pimp in an attempt to save one of his sisters from a life of a sex worker, only to end up a whore himself, hoping to survive in a concentration camp in Germany during the Second World War. Will his sisters survive the war with their honor intact? Will Pasqualino's machismo survive the indignity? Did I mention this as a comedy?
Oh, yeah.
With me, as always, is my co-host, Erin Brown. Hey, Erin, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
The struggle is real and the world is collapsing, but otherwise, I can't complain. No one would
I can
listen.
always complain. Yeah.
Yeah, and no one listens, so why bother? It's okay. I don't mind. Adding to your plate of woes, of course, was getting to spend 2 hours with Pasqualino Setavazella. I jokingly made his journey to sound much more heroic than it is. You know, when we first meet him, he's a deserter. He's stolen the bandages off a dead soldier in order to fake an injury. Later, we see him sexually assault a woman in a mental hospital who is tied to a gurney. Wertmüller does everything in her power to keep you from liking this character, and yet he's the good guy? Or is he?
He's a good example of the protagonist is not necessarily the hero. Because he's definitely the protagonist. Yeah, he's just such an asshole. Everything he does is shitty. Like like you said at the beginning, he starts out with the bandages he stole from a wounded soldier. When you see him in his pre-war life, he smacks his sister around because he doesn't like what she's doing and doesn't want her to be a sex worker. He seems to work for the mob. I'm not sure what Don Raphael's deal was, but I got a lot of like he's the local Godfather vibes off that guy.
I don't think he was very high. I don't think Pasqualino is very high up in the mob, though.
No, he's like the lowest level you can be, I think. He exists so they can blame stuff on him, is my guess. That would be his job, is the guy they blame stuff on, because they certainly didn't help him when he screwed up and killed the pimp and then had to go cut up the farting corpse, which was the weirdest scene.
Well, he's a rat. He's such a rat, he rats himself out. I think the mob had good instincts not trusting him.
Oh, probably. He's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. He's...
I had a hard time empathizing with anyone in this film, but I did empathize with his lawyer because his lawyer had this perfectly good, look, it's your word against a dead man. You can say it's self-defense. No jury in the world is going to convict you. You were protecting your sister's honor. Then Pasqualino, because of his pride, confesses and literally brags about it, and it's on the front pages in Naples. There's a phrase called dry snitching. He's dry snitching on himself all the way through. It's the only film I can think of, because we talk a lot about it, the unreliable narrator. Here, Pasqualino is the narrator. You literally are watching this through his point of view, and we'll talk about that in terms of how Wertmüller views men and how her view of how men view women is important to several aspects of this film later. But he is a unreliable narrator who constantly keeps snitching on himself and telling us all of the unreliable things that he does all the way through it. I can't think of anything either in literature or in film where we have a character like this.
Yeah, he is something else. He's not sympathetic, like, at all, the whole way through. And I mean, even at the end where you do feel bad for what he went through, it's like he's still an asshole. He's still a terrible person, incompetent at pretty much everything he does. He thinks he's good with women. He thinks that all women like him, and that's not true either.
The teenage girl, before he kills the pimp that he's grooming, who he ends up saying he's going to marry at the when he comes back at the end, is a really good example. That's the level at which he's able to flirt, is with basically a high school girl. Of course, when he returns and finds that all of his sacrifice was for naught, because not only have all of his sisters had to become prostitutes to survive the war, but the teenage girl, who, as proper grooming does, has grown up into somebody old enough for him to marry, became a prostitute to survive the war as well. That is a very interesting metaphor, and what I think makes this film a lot deeper than most of these, what, for lack of a better word, picturesque type films, which generally I don't think work. Our Lord and Savior Lindsay Anderson's worst film was Oh Lucky Man, where he attempted one of these kind of Don Quixote-esque, Candide, Augie March type picturesque. I don't think they work on film very well, but this one does, because instead of having a naive protagonist and seeing the world through his point of view, you have a protagonist who is so jaded and so cynical, you almost are empathizing in his place, because he, and you are filling the void. He puts himself all through this to keep his sister from entering prostitution and becomes a prostitute himself, only to return to find that pretty much all of the women in his life, except for his mother, have become prostitutes. Gives this a deeper level than most of these picturesques, which just basically have the moral lesson: gosh, isn't life a lot harder than you think it's going to be?
I thought his mother became a prostitute too. Towards the end, like she had dyed her hair and was wearing makeup and stuff. I think like all of the women had. Did I misinterpret that?
Probably not. You know what, Erin? I don't think I noticed that. Good job.
Thank you. So he thinks he's great with women, and he looks down on women performing sex work. But that's what he ultimately decides he has to do to survive. And it doesn't turn out well for him, and the commandant can see right through him. She knows exactly what he's doing. And she's going to, take advantage of that. But he's not going to win. He's not going to get anything he really wants out of the deal. Kind of an important statement that, part of why this guy's such an idiot, it never occurred to him that a lot of women become sex workers because that's what they have to do to survive, and that's what it looks like when he comes back from the war. That was so bad for them that the only thing they could do was, sell their services to the American troops that were occupying Italy. I mean, because it had come up earlier in the film that they didn't have nearly enough money, and Don Raphael wasn't helping out with the money after he got arrested. So what were they going to do when, war had taken its toll on the country, and then all of a sudden there were a bunch of men who hadn't seen their wives and girlfriends for years? It's a good way to make some money, if you don't have any.
I think a lot of it has to do with Giannini's performance in this. He started out as kind of a matinee idol, and then he made, I don't know how, at least 6 that I know of films, probably many more, because a lot of Lina Wermüller's films aren't available easily. Giannini's actually better known here in the States than, say, Marcello Mastroianni, the star of films like 8½, and we talked about in The Organizer, even though Mastroianni is much better known in Italy than Giannini. People might recognize Giannini for he played the Emperor in the Sci-Fi Channel version of Frank Herbert's Dune. He was in Hannibal. He's in a lot of movies. He's even been in Adam Sandler comedies. I mean,
he was in one called Once Upon a Crime, which I saw in the early 90s and liked back in the day. I haven't watched it since because it wasn't good, but he was in that, and it turns out that's a remake of an Italian movie as well. So if even I know who he is, then
exactly.
he did make the jump to American cinema.
Speaking of remakes of Italian movies, Wertmüller's film with Giannini, Swept Away, was remade with Giannini's son playing the Giancarlo Giannini role opposite Madonna, with diminishing results. But,
yeah, I heard that was not great.
The original was, but the original was I thought a really good reversal of the Admirable Crichton, which we've covered on this podcast. The remake, not good. I like Guy Ritchie films, but he didn't have what Wertmüller has.
He's got a very different style. I was just going to say he's got a very, very different style, I believe. Different audience.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about Wertmüller's style here. Something I've noticed, because we've been covering a lot of female directors, and I also talk about this with Rose Glass, who directed last year's Love Lies Bleeding, and did probably my favorite horror film of all time, Saint Maud, back in 2019. We're talking about Chantal Ackerman, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and we'll probably talk about again next week when we're talking about Agnes Varda. The women directors that I'm experiencing seem to have a better sense of pacing because they are more detail oriented. It seems they will linger on scenes just long enough, but they have there's just a sense. And you think about with John Dielman, long shots, they go exactly as long as they need to, and if they were a minute more, they'd be boring as heck. But it picks up exactly the amount of detail. It's almost like the difference between listening to a song to try and understand the lyrics and listening to a song for its beat and melody and kind of creating a theme in your head with these female directors. But not Wertmüller. Wertmüller moves her film along at a breakneck speed. Never stalls for even a moment. There's not, and maybe this is something that you noticed, but this film is packed from one moment to the next, and from beginning to end, it almost like a Looney Tunes cartoon. There is just always something going on in every single frame. We'll talk about later when we get to our opinions of the film. Maybe the whole isn't as good as the sum of its parts, but the sum of its parts are often laugh out loud funny and beautiful, but it's in a kind of Roadrunner, Coyote, or Bugs Bunny and Elmer kind of a way.
The infamous farting corpse scene is a good example of that because it's so ridiculous and so silly and just keeps going, but not so long that you hate it, but it stays funny, and just thing after thing after thing after thing happens. Even once he's done and he's putting the suitcases out the window, it's just so goofy. It's just so ridiculous.
Giannini's eyes make that scene. He has these sleepy, deep-set eyes, but when he opens them wide, they take up like half of his face. Every time a fart started coming out of that corpse, Wertmüller would cut to his eyes, and his eyes were funnier than the farting noise. And then when he finally gets it on the table and he's relaxing and he's taking a deep breath because he just hauled this incredibly fat man, and he's just that he obviously wasn't strong enough to get on a table, and then that fart comes again and it cuts again to his eyes just going wide, and you can, we were talking about how in Giancarlo Giannini you could taste the dirt. In that scene here, Wertmüller made me smell the fart.
That was some brilliant physical comedy with his face and with what he was doing. That worked so well. It was hilarious. I think that Giannini was really well cast in this because he was able to convey with his physicality every change that his character went through, from when he was a doofus soldier with the fake bandages to when he was, thought he was, he thought all the women liked him and he was like strutting around, to where ultimately with the commandant, he's just broken down by the end of it. The whole way through, his physicality was exactly right for each moment. It was amazing.
And I have a soft spot for Giannini because when I first got into foreign films, it was these Lina Wertmüller films were, I think, the earliest time I sat and watched multiple films by the same director and the same actor in a foreign language. So it's kind of my villain origin story, but it was my junior year of high school, and it was at what they called a Lina Wertmüller film festival. She had a new film out, I think it was 1986, so it might have been Joke of Destiny. She was promoting a new film, and instead of paying to have her fly over from Italy or buying advertisement, they set up these kind of crappy, cheap ass quote unquote film festivals. Her films from the early 70s. If I remember correctly, it was this one, Love and Anarchy, All Screwed Up, and The Seduction of Mimi. And I was at that festival because I wanted to see the seduction of Mimi, and it hadn't been available yet on videotape. And I had been wanting to see that film since was 9 years old. And this is one of my earliest cinema discovery moments. But when I was 9, my parents gave me and my brother $2 apiece to go to the local theater and see the latest Richard Pryor comedy because it was PG. And so, and most Richard Pryor movies are, but it was called Which Way Is Up? And it was still totally inappropriate for a pair of 9-year-old BT dubs. But it was a remake of Wertmüller's Mimi the Metalworker, which, of course, I saw later in my junior year of high school at this so-called festival. And Mimi the Metalworker is a great film. And Which Way Is Up was actually a rather close remake, and Lina Wermüller is even credited as one of the screenwriters. Which Way Is Up is not a good movie, and Pryor isn't unfortunately good in it. Now, some of that might be, I'm much more familiar with the original now than obviously at 9, but at 9 years old, I walked out of that movie and I absolutely loved it. I was obsessed with it. In hindsight, I think Richard Pryor taking a Giannini role, which was very similar to the one he played here in Seven Beauties, was perfect, and he should have been perfect for it. They have the same kind of physical comedy, Erin, that we were talking about. I could picture Richard Pryor in this film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he could have done great with that, yeah.
But Which Way Is Up was made in the late 70s, and he was heavily into cocaine at that time, and so it's very sentimental, which this film, and the original Mimi the Metalworker, or The Seduction of Mimi, as it was called here in the United States, definitely, was not, it was like this. He was a buffoon, and we were to laugh at him like a buffoon. We never felt sorry for him. We were made to feel sorry for the Richard Pryor character, and a lot of that had to do with his performance, which, like I said, it's too bad because he would have been perfect. He should have been perfect for that role. The other problem with it is not funny. The way that Mimi was funny, and it's not funny the way that that Seven Beauties is funny. So when you have something that's comic in tone but dealing with really dark material, and the jokes don't work, it doesn't work. But to 9-year-old me, it was incredibly cool. I didn't know a lot about black culture. My parents listened to classical music, so I didn't even have, old 45s of soul or jazz music around the house. And there was something just edgy about being able to quote lines from the R-rated Richard Pryor at school. I had a friend whose dad had a big comedy record collection and had Richard Pryor, Cheech and Chong, Lenny Bruce, and we used to quote them back the same way people now do, with Monty Python, or like we did last week with The Big Lebowski. And so it really was an important moment in my life, and it was all because of this remake of The Seduction of Mimi the Metalworker. And so that's what led me to this festival. It was kind of the holy grail to see the original of this film that meant so much to 9-year-old me. And I have to say, not only did I stick around for the other 3 films, I have been addicted to Commedia all'Italiano ever since. It was during that time, Wertmüller got a lot of success here in the United States, and there were a couple of remakes of her films. She actually got a picture deal with Warner Brothers. It was through Wertmüller I discovered Fellini. She was the assistant director on 8½, so I had to see that next. And of course, I had to go all the way through Fellini's back catalog. It's also how I discovered De Sica and Rossellini, which led me to the neo-realist farces of Monticelli, Petrie, Bellocchio, which led me to making poor Erin and Scylla watch films like The Organizer in China Is Near, which you can hear by going to our posts on ko-fi.com/World Cinema History, where coincidentally there's a tip jar if you're so inclined. But Wertmüller was really popular in the 70s. Lorraine Newman had a reoccurring character on Saturday Night Live where she would come out with the big white glasses that Wertmüller was known for and be interviewed by Barbara Wawa. as I said, they did remakes of a couple of her films. She had that big contract. Not so much today talked about. But in 1975, she again was the first woman ever nominated for the Academy Award for Best Director for this film. Now, Erin, hearing that and knowing that first nomination for a woman was, number one, as late as 1975, but number two, for this film, is that something that surprises you when you think back on human cinema history, or is that like, oh yeah, that's natural? Just, after watching this film.
But the sad thing is that sounds actually kind of early to me for a woman to be nominated for Best Director, which is pathetic because women can direct. They're good too. But it does make sense that it was for this film because this was wild. This was a journey, and to be able to make a good film like this, with all of the stuff that happened in this film and still have it be good and something you want to see, that takes some real talent because this is a dark film. And I kind of want to go back to what you were saying about Richard Pryor in What Way Is Up, or Which Way Is Up. Sorry. I think they may have added the sentimentality because I'm not sure American audiences are good at having a protagonist that they can't, empathize with. And you couldn't empathize with Pasqualino in this because he's such a dick. So it would make sense that they would have to try to inject some more, emotion into an American remake. If you look at just how people responded to Walter White in Breaking Bad, so many guys don't understand that he's not a hero. He's the protagonist. You're not supposed to see things from his point of view because he's a monster. And it's similar to this where, the only time you really feel any kind of empathy is when he's in the camp and he's just trying to survive because he's not a good person. He's not a good person when he comes out of the camp either. He's just broken, and you have to feel sorry for the guy that's broken.
Can I kind of drill into that? Because I think you stumbled on
Sure.
what makes this film genius in a way, despite the grotesquerie that you go through. And there's a lot of grotesque.
Oh yeah. It is
horrific.
But
despite that, but what makes this film genius is those scenes that an American film uses to build empathy with a character. Seeing him walking around moping or what have you, here are played for laughs. And if you haven't seen a lot of Italian cinema, you may not realize how much this is satirizing a lot of Italian films that have this idea of just people wandering around moping, what with weepy music playing underneath them, But to your point, that that's what an American film does, to give you empathy. Oh, something bad happens, no matter how bad the character is, if they show him moping enough. Here, it's played for laughs. He, when he's being tortured by having to stand upright and stay awake, which of course is also an opportunity for more of the flashbacks to his killing of the pimp and the trial afterwards. And those heavy set eyes of Giancarlo Giannini, and for a moment you're about to feel sorry for him, and then it just cuts to him as this slicked up person going to kill a pimp and just bumbling everything and slapping the crap out of his sister, as you mentioned, and you aren't allowed that for even a moment. And his pathetic attempts to seduce Shirley Stoller, the commandant of the prison guard, with the whistling and his pet, sad puppy dog eyes, and then when it cuts to the flashback of when he's sentenced to the 15 years or the 10 years in the mental hospital, and he can't help, like an alcoholic reaching for a drink. At that moment of bad news, he starts flirting with that teenage girl that he's been grooming, that he eventually comes back to marry. And you at least some empathy for somebody who's just been sentenced to spend the next 10 years of his life in a 1940s Italian mental hospital, completely wiped out. This movie doesn't have a sentimental bone in its body.
Honestly, that's fascinating that it can be that good and you still don't like the main character, because I'm so used to American films where you're supposed to like the protagonists because it's so simple. It's, here's our guy, we have to root for this guy. It's like, well, why would you root for this particular guy? This particular guy is horrible. Everything he does is horrible. It is funny to see how he makes so many mistakes but thinks he's cool. Like he's trying to seduce the commandant and thinks he's being all slick and cool, and he's not. He's a buffoon. And he's a buffoon the whole way through. The commandant can see that, and which is hilarious too. I mean, that she knows exactly what he's doing, and he thinks, oh, all women are the same. They all have a heart. She's a Nazi. Nazis, no, there's no such thing as a good Nazi. It's not possible. You can't have those beliefs and be a good person at the same time.
In many ways, he's a sadly modern figure, I think. He complains to be non-political, but praises Mussolini for basically making Italy great again, crediting Mussolini for the roads, the ones they've been building since the 2nd century before the Common Era. When he's talking to the mental patient who's been sentenced to 25 years merely for thinking and being a socialist, as opposed to the 10 years he got for taking another human being's life, all he can say is, boy, we didn't have any respect until Mussolini was here. And does this sound at all familiar? Yeah, he says ridiculous things, but now people respect us because they fear him, blah, 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 blah. Does that ring at all a modern bell to you?
Gee, I wonder who he could be comparing this to. I wonder what Mussolini is. But yeah, I mean, and also the way that he thinks that his sisters are bringing shame on the family. So is he. He's an idiot and he does stupid things. He's no prize. He's like, just reminds me of the Manosphere Now, where you're supposed to respect men because they're men. It's like, yeah, but shouldn't you be a good person? Shouldn't you earn that respect, maybe? And he just thinks he should be respected because he's the man of the family. And what is he doing to support them? I mean, what even is his job? They're always talking about not having any money, and you only ever see the women doing any kind of work. You never see him do anything except strut around with his slick back hair and his suits. And
he does give some money to his mother for groceries, but we don't know how he got it. He could have just hustled it on the street. I have my headcanon where he was just standing out there with a cup.
That wouldn't surprise me, or scamming the women that he claims he's so good with, which, I think, when he's walking down the street and all the women are looking at him like they love him and they want him, I think he's just imagining that. The whole unreliable narrator thing, that's all in his head. He has no idea.
Well, Wertmüller basically tells us that finally in the last 3 minutes of the film. We get the only point of view shot, and it's from Pasqualino's point of view, which is an odd place to put the first point of view shot of a film. But that is, Wertmüller saying, yeah, this is all through his point of view. And that's going to take me to another subject, which is, of course, the reaction to Wertmüller, who, because, of course, with that amount of fame, you're going to get haters.
Oh, definitely, especially women. If you're not a cishet white guy. I mean, look at all the hate Taika Waititi gets, You have to fit a certain mold or you're going to have haters.
Wertmüller was loved, actually, by the male film critics. It was feminist film critics who really came after her. And you can see why. If you take a cursory look at this film and you're not looking at it as satire, And you're not seeing this as a satire of male machismo. And you maybe haven't watched, and I'm not going to say that about all the critics, but you haven't watched enough Italian film to realize that this is a particular type of man in Naples who is being satired here. Just, the same way that Boston guy or New York guy or LA surfer guy would here in the United States, And so maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I'm saying maybe they're just missing that amount of context. But she was being torn apart in what was called the feminist press at the time, and even a film critic like Pauline Kael, who is very knowledgeable about film. She probably forgot more about film than I ever knew. She hated Wertmüller, and she hated the fact that male critics responded so well to Wertmüller films. It didn't help that Wertmüller refused to label herself as a feminist, and famously told a reporter, "I'm a socialist, you're a feminist. Stop confusing the two of us." Her response to the allegations from people like Kyle that her repeated humiliation of female characters and her portraits of them as being overweight and battle axes, and all of this was feeding into deep-seated male fantasies and setting back the cause of women's right, was basically the Italian version of "suck it up, bitches," and that there's more where that came from, or words to that effect. I probably made that up. But that seems like what her attitude was. But in fairness to Sister Kyle and the rest of Wertmüller's haters, every Wertmüller film I've seen is told from a distinctly chauvinist pig male point of view. Every single one of them. This is a trope that she goes back to, and this is her way of showing the world, is always through this machismo point of view. And their view of women is notoriously poor, whether it's meant as a satire on male pigdom and their views of the opposite sex, which is obviously my opinion, is something that we can discuss. I do think it's interesting that all these men are not only not very bright, but they hold Stone Age views not just on women, but everything, and are absolutely made the subject of ridicule throughout these films. I know this is your only experience with a Lina Wertmüller film, but just with this as an example, did you lean on the satire of machismo or a woman tearing down other women?
I feel like it was a satire of machismo. I think that if she really felt like, if this was really her view, that she would have cast more attractive actresses, like stereotypically attractive, and had them just be idiots. And that's not what she did. So it's all how this particular asshole sees women is what I think that was the thought behind the casting. I could be wrong, but that's what it felt like to me, is like the women were acting a certain way because that's how this character believed they were acting, no matter what the reality was.
Had you heard of Lina Wertmüller before watching this film?
Not really. I think I'd heard the name, but I didn't know any of her work.
Well, the reason why I ask is because it ties into the feminist theme, and I'm not saying that these women didn't have a point. Their point being, male critics have a female director, and they picked this one.
Yeah, because
duh,
I don't think that,
of course they will.
Because I don't think they knew they were being satirized. I think that might be the problem. Is satire is tricky. Yeah, satire is really tricky. And American films are typically a lot more black and white, in my opinion. I know that there's a lot of really great American films that aren't like that, but for general audiences like me, you don't necessarily. You're not looking for that kind of film, and you're not going to necessarily notice that it's a satire. There was
only one Close Encounter to the Third Kind in the 70s. out of the United States. And there was only one 2001: A Space Odyssey in the 60s in the United States. France alone, Germany alone, Italy alone produced films of that quality every year in both of those decades. So I agree with your point 100%.
It's kind of why I think the 70s are an anomaly for American film, because you do have more films like that, that challenge your beliefs, and are more experimental in what they're trying to do and tell stories that you don't really have a hero. Because for the most part, a lot of American films are a lot more simplistic, and that's what we're used to. I'm going to blame the studios, honestly, because they want what sells. And a lot of European films.
Yeah, as we're always reminded, it's the film business. It's not the film arts class.
Right. And that's why it's so frustrating. If you're an independent filmmaker, you know what you want to make and you know what you want to tell, but you're not going to get the funding. So you're not going to be able to tell the story the way you want to tell it unless you've got some innovative way of doing it. It's difficult. It's hard to get the funding, and it's hard to know the people to help you fundraise on a small level, which is, one reason I'm glad we're sharing Nicole her GoFundMe for her films, and helping to support independent filmmakers can get more interesting quality films out there that aren't the studio garbage where it's remake after remake after remake. We need to invest in the art of film, and we're not used to that in America. So that's why European films don't necessarily do well over here. And I'm not saying every European film is brilliant, because they've got a lot of garbage too. But you're more likely to have something that challenges your perspective.
Well, not a lot of their garbage makes it over here either.
That's true.
We get their best generally.
Yeah.
Some of those are still shitty.
That's true.
I mean, and the list of shitty European and Indian and Chinese and Japanese and African films that I've seen is much longer than the list of good ones. But the reason why we have this podcast and we're not doing a Hollywood podcast is because those films the Hollywood films are already being covered 100 different places.
Oh yeah.
Whereas these films aren't.
That's true.
And so this is our niche,
Yeah.
But we're not in any way saying automatically because this is what we're covering, we feel that they're superior.
Yeah, because there are a lot of really great American films, but they're already being discussed. That's why if we do American films, we have to find the little niche ones that nobody knows about. And there are still
exactly, because otherwise we're just repeating the exact same thing that somebody could get someplace else.
Yeah. And we do need to support the smaller films that people haven't really heard of. Like Hundreds of Beavers is one that I saw this year that I loved. And it was just this weird, low-budget, independent comedy that it's black and white. It's almost a silent film. And it's like live-action Looney Tunes almost. It's ridiculous, but it's amazing.
Yeah, we covered Hundreds of Beavers on our best of 2024 list in January. Available on ko-fi .com/World Cinema History. Yeah, there are a lot of. So we're not saying that these films are better. What we're saying is they're under discussed, and we're giving them and we're giving them a platform.
Yeah, and then there are things like with this one, getting back to whether she's a feminist or not. It just feels like we don't necessarily understand what she's trying to do. I don't think she's feminist or anti-feminist. Like she said, she's a socialist.
I think both sides didn't understand what she was trying to do. I don't think. I don't think I'm going to take Pauline Kael out of this because she personally disliked Lina Wermüller. She didn't like the way she dressed. She didn't like her big white glasses. She didn't like the way she talked. So we'll take her out of it. But most of the feminist film critics weren't criticizing Wertmüller. They were criticizing the male critics for latching onto her when there were female directors like Chantal Akerman, like Agnes Varda, that were being ignored.
And that's a fair point, because did any of the male critics that were talking about how great Lina Wertmüller was, ever actually watch John Dielman? It's because it's telling a story that they don't want to hear, but seeing something that they can.
Andrew Saris, the one I can name. No, we never got Pauline. We don't know Pauline Kael's opinion. We don't know Roger Ebert's opinion. We don't know Stanley Kaufman's opinion. Andrew Saris saw John Dielman in 1983. I'm glad you brought this up, by the way. God, I want to talk about this. That's awesome. I'm so glad you stumbled on this. This is great. Yeah. Andrew Saris from The Village Voice brought what's called the auteur theory to America from France, which the auteur theory is this idea that the director is the author of a film and needs to be credited the same way the author of a novel is. And yes, somebody else wrote the screenplay, somebody else doesn't matter. It is shaped through the eye of the director. The French New Wave directors of, say, Francois Truffaut, Jean-Luc Godard, all of that trend was something that Andrew Saris was central to making popular in the United States through The Village Voice. So 1983, they finally get around to releasing Jean Dielman in New York City for the first time, even though, it was 8 years later.
Yeah.
And Saris gets called out in a review of it, saying, how come we haven't heard from the man who brought the auteur theory to America about what his opinion is of Jean Dielman, this important French film? And so Andrew Saris said, "Fine, I'll take 3 hours and 20 minutes of my life," and he sat through it and said, "Yeah, it's an acid masterpiece. You happy?" And that's all we got from any mainstream critic.
Yeah, that's pathetic.
And he never talked about it again.
Jeez.
Yeah, we don't have those people's viewpoint on John Dielman, not because they were deliberately, but because it just did not make a dent here in the United States at all. Until the Sight and Sound poll.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I had that story stuck away for John Dielman, but we never got to it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and so and unwasted research there. But yeah, but to your point, the male critic, Stanley Kaufman, was a big advocate for Lina Wertmüller, and he got it. Because he, like myself, had seen all of these, commedia all'italiano films and knew what it was satirizing. And he knew what it was satirizing in terms of flashbacks and picturesque stories and of what came through neorealism and these, the socialist embodiment of the working class tough male who is inhibited by nothing except the women in his life that he has to protect with his honor.
Yeah.
John Simon got it. John Simon, the bitchiest film critic in the history of bitchy film critics.
You gotta love a bitchy film critic.
And he
They're
was
the most entertaining to read.
Yeah. John Simon is incredibly entertaining to read, but he's also, unfortunately, incredibly learned. And so you can't even, it's not like Rex Reed where you're like, he's bitchy and stupid so you can have fun with it. You can't have fun with John Simon because he's incredibly educated and snobby about it. to add to his bitchiness. So, but it is incredibly entertaining to read John Simon, unless he's criticizing somebody you like, and then suddenly it's like, I've been attacked.
Yeah. How dare you?
But John Simon was another advocate. He got it.
Yeah.
Roger Ebert gave this 4 stars. He got it. But none of these people wrote extensively about feminism.
Yeah.
If I'm a feminist film critic and I'm reading their reviews and they're saying, "Well, this is actually a feminist film," but then you have nothing record no record of what they believe the word feminist means to them, even,
Yeah.
then yeah, I think it is easy to jump to the conclusion that I don't think you got it.
Yeah.
Or if you're Kyle, to then turn and blame it on Wertmüller, who, to the feminist point, creates these awful female characters,
Yeah.
makes them physically grotesque and I'm not talking about weight. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about anything, I don't want to say anything. I'm not trying to get canceled here on the one hand, but on the other hand, I'm not talking about what these literally in terms of the way they're made up, in terms of their eye makeup, in terms of their eyelashes, in terms of their eyebrows, in terms of the way their hair is done. Everything is done to make these women look as grotesque as possible. And in terms of the sound, how they're dubbed, they are given voices that are as annoying as possible on purpose. And that's every female character in all four of these early 1970s Lina Wertmüller films. And so to the feminist point, yeah, you're setting up a satire. Gosh, this is what how men see women. But on the other hand, it could go full circle. And is this how men see women? Because women like you portray women looking like this, and so men see women like that. You see the circle, don't you?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's in the stories that she's, at least this story, because I can't really speak about her other films, but this is a story of a man with other men, and the women all look terrible. And it may be a satire, but it's still a man's story. And for male critics to praise her all the time and ignore feminist filmmakers who tell women's stories, it's frustrating, because she can tell whatever story she wants, obviously. That's, and if she's making fun of these stereotypes about men, that's great, but don't make that the only female filmmaker that you like. That doesn't give you a whole picture of what feminism is.
And you mentioned you hadn't really heard of her, or maybe heard her name a time or two, but couldn't associate it with maybe didn't even know she was from Italy with a name like Lina Wertmüller.
Right.
A lot of, I think, the reason why she disappeared after the debacle of A Night Full of Rain, the long ass title one with Candice Bergen, you didn't see her films imported here in the United States as often. I think Joke of Destiny in the mid 1980s traveled to a couple of Odeon theaters in Michigan, and that's how I ended up seeing it. But very, very, very few of her films were because she made another, I think, 16 or 17 films after that in Italy, but they just weren't shown anymore. She disappeared in the United States after having been for that week or two in 1975 around Seven Beauties, so famous that there was a Saturday Night Live skit, a repeated Saturday Night Live skit about her, and nominated for an Academy Award for Best Director instead of Steven Spielberg for Jaws that year, just as an example. And I think some of that was that feminist backlash that male critics had to eventually kind of take a look back and say, maybe we were wrong about our view of Wertmüller, and she really didn't have a resurgence until 2015 when the documentary Behind the White Glasses came out, and there you had just a ton of people who were deeply inspired. When Martin Scorsese was interviewed in that film and talked about how he didn't understand her films at first, but grew to love them, and how it influenced several scenes in her film, the swarm of Martin Scorsese fanboys began looking at Wertmüller's films, especially these four that we're talking about from Love and Anarchy through Seven Beauties in the early 1970s that are considered her mainstays or her masterpieces, because the same as I was looking at Fellini and Monticelli and Bellocchio because they were of their influence on Wertmüller, they were looking at Wertmüller to see her influence on Scorsese. Now, of course, most of these people went on to become college professors to teach other film students so that they can become college professors to teach other film students, to teach our future generation to become college professors and teach film. But a few of them did go on to make films. 2022, Wertmüller got an honorary Oscar, and Greta Gerwig was there. Hurt Locker director Catherine Bigelow was there, whose film Near Dark we'll be covering next month, and Isabella Rossellini, of course, the daughter of the neorealist director Roberto Rossellini and the actress Ingrid Bergman, and they were all there to celebrate her achievements, and Gerwig talked about her influence on her as a filmmaker. Not just as a woman could make film, but specifically the way her films used black humor to tell a story. And there are two visual references to Seven Beauties in Gerwig's billion-dollar hit Barbie, just for an example. So I'm not saying she was canceled for the period in between, but I think that subtlety of discussion about her work was quieted during that period simply because there were more important things to talk about in terms of film, and she isn't a good example of a female director if you are looking at a female director's role as advancing feminism or female rights. This is a woman who made films for entertainment, and where I think she is an icon for feminism is she showed she could make films just as well as men could, just as entertaining, just as fast-paced, and tell them from a male point of view. And in a lot of ways, I think she out-machismoed a lot of 70s films because I think she's created four at least of the most male-dominated films of that period. This is as manly as a Ernest Hemingway novel in many, many, many ways. And so in that way, I think she was a icon for feminism as someone who was able to do it first, as an icon for feminism in terms of telling female stories or advancing the struggle against the patriarchy or any of the other things that you need to be any of those boxes. No, she leaves them completely unchecked. And that's probably why it was 2015 before her work got rediscovered.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. And she definitely has a place in feminism as a director because she's demonstrating, I can do this too, we can do this. But yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see how feminists at the time didn't really like her. And I think that's fair. I think it's a completely fair criticism.
To that point, the ending scene of The Seduction of Mimi is just a grotesque sex scene with a very large bottom woman, and and you have the second to the last scene in this film where you have Fernando Rey's character commit suicide literally by jumping into shit. And of course, this was Fernando Rey at the height of his fame. This is Fernando Rey right after French Connection, and having starred in many of the Luis Buñuel films, going back to Viridiana, and he was a male icon, older, but a sex symbol, I would say. Wouldn't don't you kind of think of him as a bit of a sex symbol?
Honestly, I didn't know who he was.
It's a generational thing. You forgot Fernando Rey. Forgot about Ray.
Sorry.
That's okay. But the fact that she took the sex symbol and covers him in shit, it's a great moment because he volunteers for it. Because he's like, yeah, I'm tired of this camp. I want to die anyway. I mean, death would be better. Giannini having to pick 6 people out to die from the camp, or all of them will be killed. A torture device for the commandant because she just sadistically wants to hurt him is just a wonderful, wonderful metaphor. For it's kind of like the choice in Sophie's Choice, but then it's made easier when Fernando Rey says, "No, you only have to pick 5. I want to die."
Yeah, that was supremely fucked up. Because I mean, there's a lot of ways to torture somebody, and mental torture is just as bad as physical torture in a lot of ways. Just about the only time I felt any empathy for Pasqualino, because he had to shoot his friend in the head, and even though his friend was saying, just do it, he still didn't want to. It was, I mean, even a shitty person, you got to feel bad for them when they're being tortured.
Well, and it takes you back to when he shoots the pimp. It's on accident. Yeah. He didn't ever have it in him.
Yeah, definitely.
The gun goes off. He was just there to threaten him and look machismo and get revenge because the pimp had beaten him up in front of a bunch of women at the house of prostitution, at the sex worker house. What do we call them now?
Brothel. It's a brothel.
At the brothel. Okay.
Yeah.
Good enough. Good enough. We must be politically correct about what we call a brothel now. Of course, But anyway, house of sex work. I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know the official term, but I think brothel is still fine.
It is on this podcast anyway.
Yeah.
But the scenes that go right before that are the ones you would think you'd have the empathy for, where he is having to please this extremely large and made up to be very, very grotesque German, speaking broken Italian, played by Shirley
German,
Stoller.
But Nazi. You gotta remember, Nazi. That makes it so much worse.
Well, and of course that's based on Inga, the real life concentration camp's wife, who did force prisoners to please her sexually, and allegedly could lose a few pounds. But anyway. But it's interesting, the casting of the American actress Shirley Stoller, who I think was best known here in the United States for The Honeymoon Killers, and then she would later play Mrs. Steve on Pee-wee's Playhouse. I think people might remember her for that. But it was interesting having her in that role, but. He has to pretend like she's attractive, but she knows he hates her and is just doing it to get food. And she's kept putting him through the paces and making it as hard for him as possible. And the one scene where I didn't feel sorry for him in any way, shape, or form, but I could empathize for a moment how it must have felt, is where she's been fucking his brains out for 24 hours and he just can't get it up anymore.
Yeah.
And she's like, nope.
Yeah.
I think we've all been there. And I had kind of like a physical pain in my groin just from kind of the memory of that, if you know what I mean. So I had an empathetic, like, oh my God, that poor man. And then I'm like, oh, wait, no, it's Pasqualino. Fuck him.
Yeah. He did bring it on himself. It's poetic justice because of the way he was treating his sister anyway, so.
Well, when he does get back, and number one, all of his sacrifice having been for nothing, because they were all, of course, just because of the war, had to, and he decides to marry that high school girl or that teenage girl who he'd been grooming, and you do have a moment of growth, I think, in that scene. You know what I'm about to say, right? About where he says, "You were a whore too," and instead of judging, says, "Did you make enough to get by? Good." Because he's been a whore, and he decides
now
to
he gets
marry.
it.
Yeah, and he goes off on how he needs so many children because society's collapsing. And then you have that last moment where his mother is like, "No, you look fine," and he's staring at himself in the mirror, and she says, "You're alive, you're alive, you're alive," and you get with those beautiful deep set eyes of Giancarlo Giannini that I'm alive, and at that moment. Just like you had empathy when he had to shoot his friend, that was the only time I actually had real, not empathy, like, gosh, that must really hurt to have to get it up 5 times in 24 hours, sort of a way. But where he's looking at himself in the mirror, I'm alive, yeah, but at what cost?
Yeah. And
are you alive?
I had empathy for him too, yeah. And when he wanted to have all the babies, wasn't Fernando Ray telling him that's how they'll end the world, is by just keep having more kids and the world will end?
It's the only thing you can do to survive is to end that. Well, Fernando Ray was putting that in a very deep subtext about how he saw the future of the world, but Pasqualino only heard the part about I have to fuck a lot, and I'm good with that. Okay. I'm on it, and of course everything else that Fernando Ray was talking about the how the economy is going to collapse, and all of that, right over his head, because he said, we have to have a lot of kids because people are going to be fighting for their last crust of bread, and the more kids we have, the more crust of bread we can get, and blah blah blah, and So it is a good callback to that scene.
Yeah. I kind of took it as he wanted to hasten the end of the world, but I might have gotten that wrong.
I think it's open for debate. I think Fernando Ray, when he gave the performance, wanted to hasten the end of the world. I don't think Pasqualino does at the end.
I thought maybe he did because of everything he'd gone through, but I could be wrong.
In Fernando Ray's performance, or whoever dubbed him into Italian because he gave it in Spanish. Yeah. Because that's how Italian movies were made, because they built Sin City Studios next to an airport of all godforsaken things. But for Fernando Ray, when he's talking about it's in his eyes and it's in his gestures and it's in whoever did the voice dubbing for him into Italian. And he's just describing the end of the world like it's a good thing, but none of that is in the writing or in the dialogue. All of that is in the performance. All of that is something you receive, because what he lists is just a horrible future, not unlike the one we actually are living in. But anyway, I don't want to get it, but I don't want to get too political.
Why stop now?
Well, I already referred to people who think Trump is Santa Claus, only older. So I guess I
think we get political every episode. We find something to get very soapboxy about. I think it's mostly me. I'm mostly the one who does that.
Yeah, and I only cut it out. If it's so topical that it's going to date the episode, because people discover our back catalog,
that's true.
We're getting 10,000, we got 10,000 plus views on episodes that were made 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Let's keep that up. I want this episode to still be relevant 2 years from now.
Yeah.
Erin, what are your final thoughts on Seven Beauties and your first experience with Lina Wermüller?
I thought it was really good. It's not one that I'm likely to rewatch because it was ugly in a lot of ways, like physically,
Grotesque.
like hard to look at. Yes, it was hard to look at in a lot of ways. And it was really dark, and I'm not super into super dark things like that. It depends. Like if it's a sympathetic protagonist, if it's somebody you like and you're supposed to like, I can watch dark things happen as long as there's a happy ending. In fan fiction, we call it WUMP, WHUMP, where you take this character that you love and you do terrible things to them so that they can, at the end of the story, they get all the nice, fluffy, happy, everything's going to be okay now kind of ending. This didn't have anything like that because you don't like the character. He's a dick. You don't like what happens to him because it's horrible, but I don't know. It's a little too dark for my tastes. So I probably won't watch it again, but it was incredibly well done. And Giancarlo Giannini is amazing. I loved how he changed over the course of the story. Just like I was saying earlier, his physicality changed during what was happening, which is appropriate. It should, but not all actors remember to do that. Like I've been watching God of War, I believe, or possibly Chief of War. Anyways, the Jason Momoa thing, it's set in Hawaii, like right around the time colonizers were coming. Like right before that, it was during the reign of King Kamehameha. And it's not amazing. I'm enjoying it because I want to see, it's a story that I don't know, and it's being told from a Polynesian perspective, and I want to support that. But I don't like Jason Momoa, and he's not a very good actor. So he doesn't change his physicality. He just yells his lines when he's angry, and he's not great. But Giancarlo Giannini in this, his physicality is changing because it's part of the character. It's part of what he's going through. It fits what's happening in the scenes, and it's in his face, it's in his body language. It's just, I thought it was a great performance. I thought he was amazing. So it's a good film. I recommend people watch it at least once just to have seen it. And if you like it, watch it again, watch more of her films, because I'm probably going to end up watching more of her films now. They may not be my favorites, but there's a good chance that I'm going to check them out because I do want to see more of what she does. I want to see more of her style and her takes on things. And I want to see more of Giannini's performances because he's good. He's really entertaining to watch.
And I would start with Love and Anarchy. Then I would go to The Seduction of Mimi is the American title, Mimi the Metal Worker. And then I would go all screwed up and Seven Beauties. Her film that she did after Seven Beauties, which, oh gosh, it has the record for the longest title. This is from Wikipedia.com in tribute to that robot from Futurama. Wertmüller is known for her whimsically prolix movie titles. For instance, the full title of Swept Away is Swept Away by an Unusual Destiny in the Blue Sea of August. These titles were invariably shortened for international release. She entered the Guinness Book of World Records for the longest film title, the previous mentioned, Blood Feud, which is the next film, which was Giancarlo Giannini and Marcello Mastroianni. Not one of her best films, and the only way you can find it right now is in an English dubbed version, which we all know how we feel about that. Right here in the United States, there aren't any subtitle versions available that I found, but definitely worth watching as a fifth once you've watched her for these four. But the original title of Blood Feud was Un fatto di sangue nel camion di Siciliana fu du uomo per causa di una vedova si sasapianta movimento politico amor morte scimi Luana Bella Tarantella Terlucci e Vino, which is a total of 179 characters. I know I'm going to have 100 pedants coming after me, but I'm leaving that in the podcast because getting notes from pedants is just one of my guilty pleasures. Well, I'm going to turn my final notes over to Martin Scorsese. And here's what he had to say about Lina Wermüller.
You watch him debase himself, just sink to like the lowest order, the lowest level, in order to save himself from a German concentration camp. And it's funny. I was thrown off by the pictures because of the style of composition and editing. For me, was very, at first, it was kind of disturbing. It took me a little while to settle into it and to understand the visual language that she was creating. Nobody else was doing that at that time. It's very different from Fellini or from Antonioni or from Leone, so, or Bertolucci, and any of this. So this was a very special artistic vision. Well, the films are very beautiful. The lighting, framing. You remember primarily the beauty of the people, even the grotesque beauty, the way the people move, the gesture, the smiles, crying. I remember Seven Beauties and Love and Anarchy having a particularly strong visual beauty. Of course, she was working with great directors of photography on those pictures, Giuseppe Rotuno and Tonino Della Colli, and she had her husband Enrico Job doing the production design on Seven Beauties. But for me, it's the beauty of the faces.
So that's it for this week. Erin, where can people find you on the internet?
I'm on Blue Sky at Toad Puppy, and I'm on YouTube at Pizza Horse Productions. You can also check out our back catalog. And if you care to join us, you can always drop us a tip, or you can join the DVD Extras Club, where if you donate on a monthly basis, you get access to extra goodies from these recordings. That is ko-fi.com/World Cinema History. So please come join us there.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you for creating that website. If you want to follow me, I'm ETROMMATER at the artist formerly known as Twitter. Be sure to join us next week as we wrap up our month-long look at women behind the camera with the woman who would become the grandmother of French cinema, Agnes Varda. And then in 2 weeks, we're going to kick off spooky season with a very special episode looking at one of Erin's favorite films, and Erin's going to be guest hosting for us. And tell us what that film is and who one of our special guests is going to be, Erin.
That film is going to be What We Do in the Shadows, which I love. It's one of my comfort movies. And we will be joined by director Luke Higginson, who we had on our episode about Relax Him from the Future.
And what does Luke Higginson have to do with what we do in the shadows?
Rhys Darby. It's the Rhys Darby connection.
If I were dying and I had a Make-A-Wish wish that I could make come true, I would get Rhys Darby on this podcast just for you, Erin.
I would love that so much. It's unlikely to ever happen, but oh my God, I would love that so much. He just has a travel show that just came out in New Zealand called Hoff Roading, where he's traveling New Zealand with David Hasselhoff. It's bananas. I just binge watched that the other day. And
I've also got confirmation that good friend of the show, Nicole DeMonesis, will be joining us for that episode. She's fun. And she's awesome. She's also a director in her own right, and she works in the sapphic vampire vein, and as a matter of fact, currently working on a vampire film. So it's going to be great to hear from her about what we do in the shadows. And this will also be her third appearance, so she'll be joining our Hall of Fame along with people like the great Fiona Powell and the great Mark Redfield. So we'll definitely have some sort of a welcoming ceremony for her,
Nice.
And then Luke's agreed to do a third episode, so he wants to do one on Kurosawa in the future, and we'll be doing that sometime in November.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking forward to that. He's a lot of fun too. That's going to be a fun episode.
Yeah, it most certainly is, but a lot to look forward to here on World Cinema History. So again, join us next week. Next week, Agnes Varda, Cleo from 5 to 7. Thanks, everybody. For those who refuse to brush their teeth because tooth decay is just a myth to sell more toothpaste. Oh yeah. For those who think just because they gave up eating carbs, the rest of us have to join them. You know who you are. If living forever means I can't munch on a whole plate of nachos and empty out a container of sour cream once a week, then forever is just too long and I don't want to do it and go on your stupid keto trip. You'll have to trip through your own state of ketosis alone, my sister in Christ. Oh yeah. I don't know if this is going to sound any good because I wrote it after somebody threw away all my junk food. I was a little cranky from carb withdrawal. Not pretty. What? Did it show? Oh yeah. For those who downloaded the podcast and gave up on it in the first 2 minutes and then just skipped to the end to clear it from their queue because it's less work than going in and deleting it, and they're stuck listening to this ending, waiting for the episode to run out.
Oh yeah!
Nice.
What? We were all thinking, eh?